All right, you literary legends, prepare to conquer the resolution like you're picking up the last slice of pizza at a party. It's the satisfying conclusion that'll have you and your characters self-fiving faster than you can say final exams. Final exams. We're talking resolutions so epic, even your toughest English teacher might shed a proud tear. So grab your pens, got it, summon your creativity. And let's whip those story endings into shape because nailing them is cooler than a penguin in sunglasses.
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
The last lesson on imaginative texts. Well done for making it this far. Clap, clap. If imaginative texts are your third text type preference, that means there are only 2 lessons left after this one before you finish Module 5. Module 6 is much smaller than Module 5, so you are well on your way to firstly smashing this course and secondly, more importantly, smashing English ATAR. However, in order to smash English ATAR, we got to take one lesson at a time, and that begins with the resolution. Before we get to the resolution though, I got to make sure you've done a few things. Make sure you have completed the previous 4 lessons on imaginative text before continuing with this one. If you have not completed those 4 lessons and their related activities, stop watching this one, go and do that, then come back here. If you have completed those previous 4 lessons and their activities, stick around. Lección objectives. Objetivo uno. Recap the structure of the resolution. Numero due. Recap example number uno. Relatedly, we will then recap step 6 of the planning steps for this example. Recap the exposition, recap the background, rising action, and climax, then actually analyze the resolution, what we're here for, and we'll basically do the same thing for example number 2. Recap step 6 of the planning steps, recap the exposition, recap the background, rising action, and climax, and finally, just analyze the resolution. The ultimate finale is a simple summary. One step at a time though. Here is that recap of the structure of the resolution. As we know by now, the resolution falls within the end part of the story, and specifically it is the final section of the short story. The resolution section has one ingredient or element, and that is the aftermath. For this element, you should do 3 things. Firstly, you should enable the protagonist to reflect on the climax. Secondly, you should underscore the affirmation of transformation. And thirdly, you should reiterate the plot's overarching theme. Speaking of overarching things, here is the overarching purpose of this section. It is to briefly bring the story to a close. And just like that, we have made it to the end of the inverted claw short story structure. A couple of reminders before we delve into example number 1. Don't forget about your title. Your short story should have one. It's conventional. The final reminder is that, with the exception of section 2, the exposition, the plot is linear. Section 1, Section 3, Section 4, and Section 5, they are linear. They move forward in time in one straight line. Section 2, the background section, is non-linear. It moves backwards in time in a curve. And we go back to a point before the exposition and explain something that led us to the exposition. Hence this dotted line at the bottom being straight to represent the linear nature of time. Sweet. We've recapped the structure, we've recapped this whole bloody thing. Let's do a few more recaps of example 1. The question is, create a text within a particular genre that explores an idea represented in this image. This is our image. Recap of the planning steps, just step 6 though. Please pause the video and read the underlined element. Okay, you know what's coming next. Here is a recap of the exposition for example 1. Example 1 is titled About Time. We looked at this 2 lessons ago. 1 lesson ago, we looked at the background, rising action, and climax. Actually, Lennox, we only looked at it in the bonus content in the activities for the lesson. Duh. Okay. This is what the background section of About Time looks like in its complete glory. This is the rising action, large and in charge. And finally, this is the climax, reasonably sized. Before we continue, please, pretty please, pause the video if it's been more than 3 days since you watched the previous lesson and completed its activities. If you're here, I'm assuming you're all caught up about example 1. Let's take a look at this resolution. The complete version, nice and short, and the deconstructed version. You what? Hannah asks in her inclined hospital bed while I'm sitting on its edge, holding our daughter for the first time. I quit. It was the third best moment of my life, behind marrying you and holding this little one right now, I said assuredly. I couldn't continue living like that, deluding myself that I was doing it for my family, when in reality, all I was doing was denying our daughter a dad and you a husband. Is that everything? Han asks while wiping a tear from her dimpled cheek, knowing full well there was an underlying cause. Let's just say it was about time. You see what I did there? See how I put the title of the story in the actual story, but at the end? Taking a look at some comments in relation to that ending. The resolution has one element or ingredient, it's the aftermath. In this aftermath, Neil, our protagonist, reflects on the events that transpired in the climax, as he tells Hannah, his wife, that quitting his job was the third best moment of his life. Here, our protagonist has recognized he couldn't continue living like that, deluding himself that all he was doing was for his family, when in reality, he was just being an absent father and an absent husband. Specifically, this dialogue tag, I said assuredly, suggests Neil is a changed person. Before telling Jessica, his boss, to fuck her false imprisonment, Neil didn't have the confidence to speak assuredly because Jessica controlled him. Neil's confidence in remarking that quitting was the third best moment of his life is the first indication in the aftermath that Neil has grown. To hit the nail directly on the head, the final sentence in this excerpt represents the affirmation of transformation. Neil's realization that he couldn't continue living like that tells the reader that the protagonist has transformed into a better version of himself. A version that wants to prioritize his new family over a soul-sucking job. As I may have already alluded to, you see what I did there? The final sentence of the aftermath is a double entendre. A word or phrase open to 2 interpretations. One interpretation is a figurative one. The idiom, "it's about time," suggests someone has done something later than expected. In About Time, this is Neil quitting his job and realizing the importance of family later than expected. Another interpretation that is literal refers to the following. The literal interpretation of Neil's response that it was about time is that the underlying cause for his resignation was about time. So Neil quit because of something about time. This final sentence also reiterates the story's overarching idea, which is that time dominates our lives. This is a final reminder to the marker that I've answered the question. Concluding the resolution with a sentence that's open to interpretation encourages the reader to contemplate your story after finishing it. Very good. Those are some comments specifically regarding the aftermath. Here are some general miscellaneous comments about this section. After reading the previous section's final sentence, that section is the climax, and that sentence was, "fuck your false imprisonment, Jessica," the reader can infer that Neil has left work and gone to the hospital to visit his wife and newborn daughter. However, it's unclear whether Neil has left work early or for good. Starting the resolution with this question from Hannah implies that Neil has left for good. The question mark indicates that Hannah is surprised by what Neil's done. And quitting his job warrants a surprise reaction like the one Hannah is exhibiting. Stellar work. Example 1, see you later. We might be checking in with you again in the review lesson. I can't remember, but at least for now, goodbye. Let's take a look at example 2. Our question, create an imaginative text with a central voice that conveys hope or redemption. Recap of the planning steps, but just step number 6. Here it is. Pause the video, have a read of the underlined element, pretty please. These are the sections of this story that we have already analyzed in previous lessons. Starting with the exposition 2 lessons ago, the story is called Simon Says. Then we took a look. We taked a look. We took a look. Then we had a look at the background, rising action, and climax sections. The background section was pretty lengthy, but I do recall for a fact that this is something that we're looking at in the review lesson. Stay tuned. So that's what the background looks like. Then we took a look. We had a look at the rising action section. Rising action is more moderate in length. Some sad moments in this part of the story. Then we looked at the climax. Got it that time. And the climax was when basically Charlie escaped. Same deal as before. Pause the video if it's been more than 3 days since you completed the previous lessons video and activities. If you're still with me, much obliged. Let's take a look, at the resolution. Complete version, deconstructed version. After I won the game, I ran for what felt like an eternity through the black of night with gashes on my back, caused by metallic wires of the fence's foundation as I crawled under it. I eventually found a road and waited by its side until daybreak, when there was better visibility for me to identify the vehicles passing me by. I hailed a truck with a big red cross on the side of it, and that proved to be my salvation. The Red Cross helped me locate my dad's sister, my Aunt Amy, who turned out to be a fellow escapee. Amy never had kids or a husband. She was always that cool auntie who was footloose and fancy-free. I told her what happened to Dad, and she woke me up to the reality of his demise. But I never heard anything about Mum. Amy and I eventually made our way back to Vienna, back to my family home that looked eerily similar to the way it was left when the soldiers took us away. It's been 6 years since that day and 1 month since the war ended. I'm having my Sunday morning special. 2 boiled eggs with soldiers. But I don't create a mini tower out of the soldiers anymore. I just rip them apart and eat them. I gaze outside through the dining room window, into the backyard where the wind is blowing a gale, fueling a maelstrom of autumn leaves. Suddenly, the front door slams open, and my body instinctively seizes up. I reassure myself, Charlie, it's just the wind. I get out of my seat to go and close the door, and that's when the scent hits my nostrils. The scent of roses. That is a wrap on Simon Says. I hope you enjoyed the story. And while we're here, I'm curious, which story have you enjoyed more? Simon Says or About Time? Shoot me a message on the platform and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, here are some comments regarding the resolution section, specifically the aftermath ingredient or element of it. This first paragraph tells us 2 things. Firstly, we can see here that Charlie's got an opportunity to reflect on the consequences of the climax. Secondly, it tells the reader how Charlie escaped from Auschwitz. Another thing we do in the aftermath element is convey the affirmation of transformation. That transformation is communicated in this element in several ways. One of those ways is diction. Compare the following 2 excerpts. Number 1 is from the exposition section of the story. He just said it's because Simon doesn't make it easy for people to win the game, whatever that means. That is excerpt 1. Excerpt 2 is where the wind is blowing a gale, fueling a maelstrom of autumn leaves. Charlie's diction in the resolution is more developed than his diction in the exposition. This suggests to the reader, before they've found out that 6 years have passed, that Charlie has grown and matured. The use of quotation marks here, won the game, for emphasis, tells the reader at the outset that since the implied escape at the end of the climax, Charlie has learned that his captivity was not a game, as his father told him it was. Another instance of showing Charlie's transformation. In the background section, Charlie refers to the SS soldiers as Simons. In the resolution section, Charlie refers to the SS soldiers as soldiers. In this way, here is the English nerdiness coming out in me. The name Simon was a motive for Charlie's innocence and naivety. Damn, that's nerdy. Therefore, the omission of this name in the resolution tells us that Charlie has evolved. Another example, the front door slams open and my body instinctively ceases up. I reassure myself, Charlie, it's just the wind. Charlie's body ceased up because he was in a similar situation in the background when he was having Sunday brekkie and the soldiers barged in and took him and his family away on the train from Vienna to Auschwitz. Charlie's instinctive reaction suggests he has PTSD, and his ability to calm down and reassure himself suggests he has emotional awareness, a skill that older adolescents typically develop. And of course, we couldn't address this section of the story without touching on the final few sentences of it. They do a lot of things, but arguably the most important is reiterating the story's overarching theme of hope. Then let's just address this rosy perfume thing. A distinctive feature of Charlie's mum was what he referred to as her rosy perfume, as we can see here in these excerpts of the background section. Then fast forward to the beginning of the resolution section that we're looking at now. We're told Charlie never heard anything about mum. Therefore, the final sentence of the entire story, the scent of roses, firstly implies that Charlie's mum is at the front door. Put differently, the final sentence gives the reader a sense of relief and closure, while making them wonder whether Charlie's mum is actually at the front door. Also, this sentence closes the story loop by answering the plot's last unanswered question: what happened to Charlie's mum? Finally, this final sentence reiterates the story's theme of hope. This is because Charlie wouldn't have commented on the distinct smell if he didn't still have hope that his mum is alive 6 years after being separated from her. I reckon this next comment tops the nerdiness meter for this lesson. Not a bad idea, that one. Nerdiness meter. Let's start it. Notice how this specific instance of gustatory imagery was foreshadowed throughout the plot to foreshadow its ending. That's up there. Reiterating the theme of hope also reminds the marker that I am answering a central part of the question, which is a central voice that conveys hope. That is the aftermath element of the resolution. Here are some miscellaneous comments. It's been 6 years since that day and 1 month since the war ended. What's the point of this sentence? It helps the reader establish some time, a rough image as to when in time this was happening. 1 month since the war ended in 1945. So we know that now it is about 1945. The war started in 1939, so we can intuit that Charlie was actually sent to Auschwitz around 1939. Another thing it does is obviously tell the readers that there has been a shift in time and place. From the concentration camp at Auschwitz in 1939 to Charlie's home in Vienna in 1945. Finally, this sentence opens up the possibility of his mum reappearing. If she had survived Auschwitz, she would have been released from captivity when the war ended, which was about a month ago. Another miscellaneous comment relates to the motif of the eggs that Charlie ate. Compare the following two mentions of those eggs throughout the story. I was having my Sunday morning special, 2 boiled eggs with soldiers. Before eating it, I would stack my soldiers 3 by 3 to create a mini tower, while mum would peel the shell of the eggs. I'm having my Sunday morning special, 2 boiled eggs with soldiers, but I don't create a mini tower out of the soldiers anymore. I just rip them apart and eat them. Before the Simons took Charlie away, he treated these soldiers made out of bread with care. After Charlie witnessed and reflected on the brutality of the Simons, he didn't treat the soldiers with care anymore. He just ripped them apart and ate them. So what this is really saying is Charlie no longer respects the soldiers in light of his treatment by them during his time at the concentration camp. Overall, the difference in the way Charlie treats the soldiers between the background and the resolution tells the readers that he has grown as a character. Last point. She woke me up to the reality of his demise. Waking me up to the reality of his demise is a euphemism to confirm the reader's suspicion that Charlie's dad died when he was struck in his temple by the butt of Simon's rifle back in the Rising Action section. Shit, yeah. That marks the end of all the main content on imaginative texts. We'll be finished all the content on imaginative texts, full stop, after this simple summary. We commence the lesson with a recap of the structure of the resolution. The overarching purpose of the resolution is to briefly bring the story to a close. The resolution section has got one element, it's called the aftermath, and it enables the protagonist to reflect on the climax, underscore the affirmation of transformation, and reiterate the plot's overarching theme. From there, we turn to example 1 and example 2. We did a few recap things regarding both of the examples. You can check those out in the PDF study notes below the lesson. Here are a few comments about the aftermath element specifically of the resolution, and then we'll discuss a few miscellaneous comments. First comment, dialogue tags can indicate the protagonist's growth. What does that mean? Well, I said doubtfully versus I said assuredly. If the protagonist has gone from being doubtful to then being assured, that implies some sort of emotional, mature growth. Another comment, diction and behavior are effective ways to communicate the affirmation of transformation. Diction is word choice. Example, in the exposition, he just said it's because Simon doesn't make it easy for people to win the game, whatever that means. Versus this in the resolution, where the wind is blowing a gale, viewing a maelstrom of autumn leaves. If you were to guess who is the older character or older version of the protagonist, blind, without knowing anything about the story, 9 people out of 10, at least, would pick the resolution. So that is an example of diction being an effective way to communicate the affirmation of transformation. An example of the protagonist's behavior is as follows. Charlie's ability to calm himself suggests he has emotional awareness, a skill that older adolescents typically develop or cultivate. Moving on to another comment, consider using a double entendre to conclude your story. A double entendre is a word or phrase open to 2 interpretations, one of which is usually, but not always, sexual. My one was not sexual. Related to that one, concluding the resolution with a sentence open to interpretation encourages the reader to contemplate your story after finishing it. Example, let's just say it was about time. Moving to a new comment, include something at the end of your story that reminds the marker that you have answered the question. That is what this whole subject is about. Example, the scent of roses reminds the marker that I've constructed an imaginative text with a central voice that conveys hope per the requirements of the question. Another point, try to elicit a sense of closure and relief from the reader by concluding your story with an implied resolution. The implied resolution in Simon Says is the final sentence, the scent of roses. It impliedly says that Charlie's mum has miraculously returned home after the war has ended. That's some stuff to do with the aftermath element. Here are some miscellaneous comments regarding the resolution section as a whole. Construct 1 or 2 motifs to add depth to your story. What is a motif, you ask? Check out the LFB. Example, in the exposition, before eating it, I would stack my soldiers 3 by 3 to create a mini tower while mum would peel the shell off the eggs. Compare that to this reference to the eggs later on in the resolution. I'm having my Sunday morning special, 2 boiled eggs with soldiers. But I don't create a mini tower out of the soldiers anymore. I just rip them apart and eat them. Well, on that note of ripping apart little pieces of bread that represent Nazi soldiers, I want to congratulate you on making it to the end of this lesson. It's the last video lesson on imaginative text, done and dusted, but the last activity is not. And then where you go after completing those activities will depend on your text type preferences for this module. Regardless of what those preferences are, you have just made a giant leap closer to pass English ATAR Island. Congrats once again, and enjoy finishing off the stories that you have been working on over the last few lessons. Once you finish these activities, go and do something to celebrate. I'd buy a Get Chunky. And I will see you in the next lesson. Goodbye for now. No, that's not it. Until then, keep it simple.